This is the YouTube version of the Hidden Experience audio podcast. This show is hosted by Mike Cleland, and that's me, and it is available on most of the popular podcast platforms. Just search out Hidden Experience Audio. And if you want to support the show, you can find it on Patreon, as well as Buy Me a Coffee. This YouTube version has ads, but the audio version is always ad-free. And you can also join my YouTube channel here. And now the show. Audio conversation with Scarlett Heinbuch, recorded Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. I have been reading and studying a lot about the near-death experience, and I have been continually fascinated by the stories that people share. This experience parallels and overlaps with a short list of other esoteric phenomena. This includes the UFO contact experience, as well as the role of the shaman, and a lot more, healing, and it goes on and on and on. Scarlett has a life story that crosses over into so many other aspects beyond just the near-death experience. These include her healing work, her service to others, and her powerful psychic abilities. And this goes hand in hand with the challenges of integrating these complex issues into her life and also her husband David's life. Scarlett holds a PhD in public policy from Virginia Commonwealth University and a master's degree in public health from VCU's School of Medicine. She is also certified in Reiki, NLP, and hypnotherapy. Her book, We Met on the Other Side, tells one of the most important and heartening stories of near-death that I have ever confronted. We talk about what happened in her life and how she met her husband, David. Get ready. This is a beautiful conversation. This episode runs a little over an hour and a half. Please enjoy. Scarlett, I want to thank you so much for saying yes to this interview. It means a lot to me.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really happy to be here.
I've been looking forward to this talk for a while, and I know your story very well. I read your book. I've seen you talk a few times. We've had some long phone conversations. And to tell this story, I think in order, I think we need to begin with the event that took place at a swimming pool, and I think you were 4 years old?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, please, if you could, I would love to hear that.
Okay. For your listeners first, I just want to say thank you, Mike, for inviting me to speak with you today or just to have a chat. This is really a gift, and I appreciate that. So starting back on my story, there are a couple things to start with, and that is I had my own near-death experience at 4 years old in 1964, so I don't mind dating myself. It's relevant because when this happened, there wasn't any language around these experiences. I don't even think the term near-death experience had even been coined. I think that came up in the 70s with Raymond Moody's work. So I was at a swimming pool with summertime with my mother, my brother, and my sister. My sister's a year older. My brother's 18 months younger. And I had just turned 4. So he was in the kiddie pool for the toddlers, because he would have been about 18 months at that time. And my mom was a registered nurse, so she had medical training. She was off that day. She had taken us to the neighborhood pool, and we were swimming in the shallow ends because I didn't really know how to swim. And the pool dipped down. It went deeper as, the slopes. But I stayed in the shallow end with my sister. Mom was keeping an eye on us, and there was a lifeguard as well. It happened to be really crowded because it was a hot summer day. And that day I was bobbing. I would jump up, and back then it was required to wear these little pink caps.
Oh, yes.
That were like plastic and had little scallops on them. And that was what you had to put in. It kind of pulled your hair and skin. It was not comfortable, but they made you do that.
We're about the same age. I was a boy, and I'm visualizing the swim club we had down the street from us. And I didn't have to wear the cap, but I knew them well.
Right. But so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So anyway, I was just bobbing up and down, jumping up and down, enjoying the water with my sister. And we were all having a good time in the pool. And each time I jumped up, I didn't realize that each time I landed, I was landing back a little bit further toward the slope. I didn't know that until on one last bob, my feet did not hit the ground or of the pool. And that's when I gasped and water started to go in my mouth. And I continued to bob. At that point, I was flailing and swallowing water. And then I lost consciousness in my physical body. I don't know the exact time lapse, but what I then became aware of is my I self was floating outside on the edge of the pool, looking down at my body in the bottom of the pool with the little pink cap through the waving water, lying there on the bottom of the pool. And I was conscious that I'm watching my body in the bottom of the pool without any question mark in my mind that both of those were me. One was a physical body and one was my consciousness. Again, no, this is pre-articulation. So I didn't have any time to, process what's happening. I'm just experiencing only without any language to make any sense of it. But that's what I experienced. So I never had any doubt from that point that there was a consciousness outside of my body that was real and aware. And the multiple streams of awareness were that I was aware that my body was on the bottom of the pool, that something had happened, and I was okay. I was floating, and I felt this sense of calm and peace that I had never experienced in my young life, which had been pretty turbulent, and I'm pretty honest about growing up in an alcoholic home, and that was not a lot of fun. And anyone who has knows exactly what I'm talking about. So to experience that sense of peace and serenity that was so transcendent and compelling, and be surrounded by a sense of comforting love. There's just no words, even now, all these years later, human words just fail to describe the emotional sense of safety and security and love and comfort and peace. These are truly transcendent feelings when you're having them. And it was so compelling. I didn't want to come back to his life. But the awareness helped me to understand, too, that I could feel other people's feelings. My mother, sensing something was wrong.
Oh, let me just interrupt. So at 4 years old, you were, I have very few memories from when I was 4 years old, probably a few.
Me too.
Yeah. So, but you consciously recall not wanting to go back.
Yes. I didn't want to come back. I was in such a wonderful state of peace, and it was like, I think I want to stay here. However, the consciousness that I was experiencing was so expansive. I could feel my mother, and she had seen that I wasn't in the pool. And then I could feel her, her stricken feelings. And she was like, "Where am I?" And she got up and then saw me lying on the bottom of the pool. So she went in and got me and pulled me out. And we talked about this years later. At the time, I kind of let it go because, again, being 4 years old, I don't even question anything. This is just what I experienced. But Mom pulled me out, and she said I was blue and not breathing. And she said for a while, and I quote her on this, she said, "For a while, you weren't with us." So she knows I was not alive for just a very brief period of time. So she knew what to do. She turned me on my side. I started throwing up water, and I made the decision that her grief and her panic and fear and love were so great that I didn't want to hurt her that way. I knew she would never, ever forgive herself if I didn't come back. So my spirit decided to come back. These are just things when I talk about it, I say I know these things, but it's hard to describe the cognitive dissonance of being a 4-year-old with an eternal sense of knowing. I don't even know how you can describe that, because a 4-year-old's mind isn't capable of really processing this level of awareness, but that's how it was. So when I came to, I do remember the scratchiness of the cement on the side of the pool, Mom crying, people gathering around, I'm throwing up water. It wasn't very pleasant. And also just the feeling that, well, here I am. guess I'm going to do this journey and not really looking forward to it. But I made a choice.
Wow. And so you had the wherewithal. Are you saying this now from hindsight, or was this your feeling in the moment?
My feeling in the moment.
Wow.
I also feel that if I'd been underwater just even a few more seconds, I probably would have completed the death process entirely. At that point, I just wasn't breathing. I think my heart was still beating. But I think that's also why I was hovering around the pool. You know, people talk about having near-death experiences and going in the light in the tunnel. I was in that pre-death experience. I had not completely died, but I was at that stage of drowning death where I wasn't breathing and I was out of my body preparing to die and go. And that's when I realized that I did have a choice. And I made the choice to love Mom and be here for her and come back. So I did.
I have both of your books. Mm-hmm. I have your first edition and your newer edition. Mm-hmm. And in the first edition, you didn't put this story in.
I didn't, because at the time, I never even connected that awareness of being out of my body and having that experience at 4 years old was even relevant to what came later. I just didn't even put it together as even being a near-death experience. Again, when that happened, there wasn't any language about this. It was a lot of children had drowning incidences at the neighborhood pool. It wasn't all that unusual, but no one talked about the consciousness part, and I just didn't even think about it. It was like, well, of course. I mean, isn't everyone aware that they're more than their body? But, you know, again, when you're 4 years old, you don't have the capability of thinking in these terms. So I didn't realize its relevance until years later when I told my mother, I said, Mom, I keep having these memories of drowning at a pool and coming back. And I said, did that happen? It's too hazy now. And she said, yes, that did happen. And so she confirmed it. We talked about it. And I asked her if she would let me record her telling her experience about what she saw, what happened. And so I did. So I recorded her narrating and telling about the experience from her viewpoint and from a nursing perspective, from a mother's perspective, and everything that had happened. So that's how when she said that I was blue and not breathing and that she'd lost me for a brief period of time, that's like, well, she knows. And people said, well, why wouldn't she have taken you to the hospital? I'm like, well, she was a nurse. I didn't flatline to my knowledge, and I came back. So, you know, there you go. So I went on home and lived my life, and life goes on. I was at a conference at the International Association of Near-Death Studies in 2015 or 16, and PMH Atwater, who is a leading researcher on near-death experiences.
Oh, I'm very familiar with her, yeah.
Had written a book about, I think it's called The Forever Angels. And she gave a talk about children who are 5 years old and younger who have near-death experiences, who are forever altered and don't realize it. And because they're too young and because they're not capable of really, you know, having the mental faculties of an older child, you know, to process these things. So I heard her talk and my whole body was just chilled. I'm sitting in the audience thinking, oh my God, I never put this together. But I had all the after effects of near-death experiences. For example, I can't wear watches. I never have been able to wear a watch ever since. I can't.
Just tell. I know why you can't wear a watch, but why can't you wear a watch?
Well, near-death experiencers often report that one of the after effects can be that their electromagnetic system just upsets technology, and anything that's using electromagnetic frequencies, like batteries and watches and things of that nature, computers. It's not unusual for things to just blip, things like that. So your body is changed. There's some belief that perhaps your neurology is changed. Maybe there's the stress response that got triggered from a near-death experience, but you are changed. But what was significant about her talk was that when you're younger than 5, you do not realize that you are different or that you are changed, because in your mind, you're so young, there's no before and after. There's no before you where your personality is completely developed and you can say, oh, this was a defining moment and I'm changed this way after. When you're 4 years old, you just accept something like this as just being another experience in your life without question. And so you're not really changed from before and after, but you're forever changed and you just don't have a comparator. So when I understood that, it helped me to understand why after that experience, the portal, I call it, never closed. And that's when things started to happen as a young child where I was able to see spirits who had passed on, hear and know things that there was no possible way I could know. People reported seeing my spirit outside of my body and my location experiences of my astral projecting. There's talks about, and I put this in the book about, my cousin and grandfather seeing me appear in the kitchen and they clapped their hands and I disappeared in front of their eyes and they were so freaked out. They ran and found my body upstairs sleeping. So these things were happening. And I didn't hear many of these things till years later at family events. But things happen, and I was a very psychic kid. I tried to understand what was happening, how these things were happening, and to reconcile that I was different from my peer group. And when I tried to talk about these things, people were really rejecting and mean. They made me feel like I was a freak.
Oh, I'm so sorry for that.
Well, and I became a painfully shy and very quiet child. It wasn't safe to talk or to connect with others because the things that most children enjoy doing, I found just frustrating and hard. I didn't like cartoons, the loud, frenetic energy and kids watching them. I couldn't. I had to leave the room. I just wasn't a person who could handle that level of frantic activity and the things that kids like to do, playing things. It just didn't appeal to me, and I just had a level of awareness. And then when you're seeing spirits, when you're a child that young, it's scary and it frightens me. And there weren't that many people I could talk to. My grandparents went to church. I did point out and added this in the second edition too. My grandmother is Pennsylvania Dutch. My grandfather claimed Native American heritage from North Carolina. Now, both of them often had very unusual experiences in the home. So they didn't think of me as being too unusual. I kind of fit in with the clan, but I never quite felt like I fit in with life. And so I grew up, and as I mentioned, being in an alcoholic home, there were just these studies and contrasts of having an awareness of peace and love and knowledge that there is indeed another side and that there's purpose, meaning, and choice in life. And then the confusion of why I was such a quiet, peaceful, and loving child. And I was very loving and affectionate because I just came back with that level of love and wanting to help people. I wanted to help fix things. If people were crying or hurting, I wanted to hug them. It was just endemic to who I was and had become. I think I was predisposed, as my mother tells me, to be a loving person. But after the near-death experience, knowing and being exposed to that incredible love on the other side, it was just all-consuming from me. I wanted to love others and be helpful. So when people weren't loving or helpful, it was just baffling to me. Wow. It's like, why wouldn't people be loving and helpful? When I saw people lie and deceive and cheat people, it shocked me. This is not what love does. This doesn't make sense. Why are people behaving this way? And it just shocked me.
You're sharing things that I'm very familiar with in many ways within my own life and more importantly, I guess, my research. I've been looking into the UFO contact experience, and so people will have a UFO contact experience. Afterwards, they won't be able to wear watches. They will have psychic abilities. They will be highly sensitive, and I think highly empathetic, I think, would be the way. Like, they feel other people's emotions.
Yes.
Is very common. And then to a very real degree, and this has also been at the forefront of my research, is they will experience powerful synchronicities that seem different than what would be a commonplace number of coincidences, like a heightened level of synchronicities. So your near-death experience closely mimics, let's say the aftermath of the near-death experience closely mimics the aftermath of the UFO contact experience. And for me, that's fascinating. It tells me, I mean, I'm going to frame it in the way that I have to frame it just so I can hold it in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
You went to another realm.
Yes. Another dimension.
Another dimension. Yes, that's a realm dimension. I struggle with these things. I do a lot of writing, and I use the thesaurus a lot, and I got to make sure to like you say dimension too many times in a sentence, you got to mix it up a little bit. So, because it's part of this whole thing, dimensionality and reality itself, but if you went to another realm, that implies something. Now, when people talk about the UFO contact experience, they want to keep it in this nuts and bolts sort of pragmatic materialist realm. And they'll say the person was on board a metal spaceship for an allotted amount of time. But if that was the case, why do they come back psychic? Why do they come back unable to use watches? It seems to be playing out that they traveled to another realm, another dimension. And so what is UFO contact when you're confronted with these kinds of clues? So I'm struggling with that in my own research, and I no longer there's something called the ETH, which is the extraterrestrial hypothesis, where the hypothesis is that these are visiting beings from a planet somewhat similar to ours, piloted by beings somewhat similar to us, and they are on a craft somewhat similar to the helicopter that we might use to go into Yellowstone National Park to abduct grizzly bears and then do scientific study on them. But that all falls apart when you really look at all the available evidence, because something much more mysterious is going on. I have spoken to a lot of shamans, not a lot, but enough. And some people who research shamans or who have a better understanding of shamans than I do will say the initiate has to go through the near-death experience before becoming a shaman. And I have met many shamans who have had the near-death experience, and I've also met many that haven't, but they have had some similar event where they have had a psychotic break, which is very common, where they'll actually go through a form of what we in the West would call a mental illness, what people in the East might call shaman sickness. So they would go through a psychotic break and then come back transformed. So I guess I'm just trying to articulate that. Well, here, let me back up a little bit. So I don't want to jump ahead in the story too much, but you are doing healing work now. And shaman is a funny term, right? But I would cautiously say that the type of healing you are doing could be considered shaman-like in many ways.
A few things. You touched on a lot of points, and I think the common denominator between near-death experiences and those who have had contact with other beings in whatever dimension they might be is there's some sort of commonality of change in us both of these, if you put these in categories. And the common denominator is there's been an expansion in consciousness. And so that consciousness expansion with an exposure to something, either a near-death experience or another being or set of beings, does something to us so that we have the same after effects. And I think that's critically important, that we have something that has taken us outside of our normal realm of thinking, living, being, and perceiving, that has catapulted us, usually in a dramatic, quick way, into another realm. And it's so jarring. It's like being pushed out of your body. And now your huge expansion of spirit and awareness and consciousness and understanding and exposure to something has shifted your spirit in such an enormous way. And now you have to come back into this physical body. But you are not the same person that left it. Whether it's a consciousness shift or a spiritual shift, we've got this physical body, but there is something in here that inhabits us. So you can call it what you will, but this you've had an experience that has altered you in ways that you will never be the same. And now how do you go on in this physical body? And I think that the physical after effects are the way of our body responding to the catastrophic, if you will, change. And I don't mean catastrophic in a bad way. I just mean it's just so powerful, so huge that we cannot contain it. And so our bodies just respond in a way that say, you are altered, you are changed. You're going to have an electromagnetic, energetic resonance and response that is going to make you more likely to not be able to wear a watch or alter things because your body chemistry has changed to match your spiritual experience. So, I mean, I'm just saying, Mike, how I interpret it, again, with the understanding that words are hard.
Oh, yeah.
But the other thing you've done is open the door to the next major experience I had, which does involve contact with other beings. And I do now realize that it was because of my near-death experience that opened that doorway for that to happen. So, and you were talking about me being a healer. Well, I had always been attracted to healing. I ended up taking 2 levels of Reiki master certifications. I didn't want to be a medical doctor or a nurse and do direct patient care because I just am not into or I don't have what it takes to be able to do that on a daily basis and handle the incredibly hard work and that it takes to be a direct patient care provider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I did care about the spiritual essence of people and suffering, and that's the spiritual component. How are we going to deal with the things that being in this life hands us? And it's not easy. Everybody is dealing with something in their life that is just challenging, so hard and so complex. And so when we begin to understand that we are united in how hard it is to be in this physical world, in these bodies, in this place where people don't have a sense of shared understanding of love and connection. And that's also what makes us different. When you've had a near-death experience or contact with other beings from other dimensions, whether you call them aliens, interdimensional beings, whatever name you want to give them, the bottom line is this. You've had an experience that, percentage-wise, most people have not. You are forever altered by it. And in many cases, it makes living here even harder because you can't reconcile what you know to be true, which is that there's a vast, vast level of consciousness of so many different layers, but there's an integrity, there's a truth, there's a justice, there's a perfection to the universe and our understanding of it. And love is the key and the driving force behind it all. So when we come back and try to live this life and we're aware that people are lying or they're deceiving or they're hurting others and they're cruel or just unwilling to help another human being who's in trouble, and you look at this and it's just puzzling. It's like, how do you operate like that? How do you live your life being so mean and horrible and wanting to hurt other people? I think you probably told your listeners, I have my doctorate in public policy, and my master's degree is in public health. My public health degree was from the School of Medicine at Virginia Commonwealth University, and my doctorate in public policy and administration was also through VCU's Wilder School. And I tell you that because I went on to formalize my education so that I could help people from a policy perspective by understanding public health needs, because that's healing, right? How do you, the public health is all things. How are you going to design good research to help people? Because you need evidence, you need research. We have good tools for a reason. And then how you enact policy that's going to help people. Policy goes both ways. You can either make good policy or bad policy. So when I put this together with my near-death experience and then this later contact with the interdimensional beings and the shared near-death experience that I had with me and David that I'll talk about, it's the same question mark that I experienced from that childhood on, which is, how can you not love one another? How can you not? How can you not use policies to help people? And why wouldn't you? So when I see cruelty and just abusive behaviors and people in leadership positions who harm others and use policy to do it, it's very disheartening to me. So as a healer, it goes against every grain that I have learned from consciousness in this universe. And I have to question why we're all experiencing this now. So, I was always advised, because this world is a tough place for people like us, to find your tribe and be supportive and find your support there, because that's the only thing you can do to survive in a world whose eyes are often closed, who've not had this experience. And we are called to have compassion for people who don't have these experiences, who harm others because they don't know better. They're functioning at a lower level, a lower vibration. If you think of music and frequency, they're the much lower levels of frequency in this giant, diverse universe. So I have to love those folks too. People say, well, how can you love people who are so cruel? And I'm like, it's not up to me to judge. It's up to me to love.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's what I have to do. And but it still makes me sad. And I'm an activist at heart. And I'm like, well, how can I help others? What can I do that's going to be useful? I cannot, at this point in my life, do one-on-one healing work. It's too much.
Too much how?
Well, when I do healing work, as I experienced with David, and I should probably get into that, but the bottom line is that portal never closed from the childhood near-death experience. And what that means is that when I go into healing with somebody, which is a sacred trust, our energies are combined and that portal comes open and more openly to me. And that means that energetically, now I'm in a conscious physical body, but my spiritual body is in that other realm simultaneously. And it is so hard to hold the physical ramifications of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's like being in this body. I'm talking to you now, but there's like another body, my spirit body, standing next to me. And I have to be able to hold the essence of both 100%. And I don't know if that's making sense to you, but that's...
Oh, it makes perfect sense to me. Yes, yes.
But it's I say walking in two worlds. It's in that way, I'm in two worlds. And I'm out of my body and in my body, conscious and expanded consciousness, and trying to hold all of that energy with that feeling of love and care for another human being who's giving me sacred trust to be in that space with them. It's enormously powerful. As I said, it's a gift, but it also drains me. And the older I've gotten, the harder it is to be able to recover from these experiences. Now, Reiki is more you're passing through energy. That's true. But because of the near-death experience I had and the empathy that comes with another human being opening their energy field and my ability to just empathically connect, and then trying to help them to connect to that love that is on the other side in their physical body, because that is, in my view, the source of healing. It takes a lot to hold the doors.
So Reiki healing, Reiki healing comes up all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've told you this before, and I know my audience has heard it, but I'm going to say it again if folks haven't. I'll try to make this quick. The research I've been doing involves people who have, for the most part, involves people who have had UFO experiences simultaneously or overlapping or in conjunction with an owl experience, the owl, the bird. So people who have UFO experience and an owl co-joined, those people reach out to me and I take their stories very seriously and I document their stories. So the people who are reaching out to me are not a big cross-section of the UFO spectrum, right? It's a very, very narrow sliver within that larger data pool. So the people reaching out to me, I have to ask, like, what are you doing for work? I'm going to be very cautious because I haven't crunched the numbers, but I will say 50% of the people who have had UFO and owl experiences co-joined, 50% of those people are doing Reiki healing. Mm-hmm. That is, I mean, I'll tell you right now, 50% of a random sampling of the overall public, they are not Reiki healers. And if they're not doing Reiki healing, they're doing something very similar. I talked to one guy who had a very powerful owl and UFO experience, and he said, I said, what do you do any healing work? And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm healing work. I don't do any healing work. So, well, okay. And then we talked for a little. He says, my wife was going through chemotherapy, and I could generate a form of heat with my hands, mm-hmm. and I could relieve the pain and symptoms of the chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that wasn't necessarily Reiki energy by definition, but I certainly put him in that category. And I have many examples of that. So I am confronted with a mystery, like, why is Reiki healing connected to people who have UFO and owl experiences? And I would say it would be very similar to your experiences where they entered another realm and somehow that portal is left open, or they have access to that portal, or they have an ease of access to that eternal life energy, let's say, mm-hmm. that may flow in conjunction with that portal. Oh, I want to say one more thing. Just I wrote this down as you were talking, you said jarring. This was jarring. Wow, do I hear that word a lot in this story. In jarring by implication is something has taken place that is outside the boundary of what we normally would consider acceptable. And then there's a term that was shared with me by a woman who was doing near-death experience research. And she said the trauma of enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And that summed up so much. I felt like I was suffering from a sort of trauma where I was confronted with all these things in my life that very clearly said, at the minimum, what it told me is there's a lot more going on than what my junior high school science teacher told me. So it falls much more into the realm of theology, or much more into the realm of spirituality, or much more into the realm of philosophy, and in a grand way, than it does in the form of engineering or materialism. And boy, does that put you at odds with the world when you walk around with those experiences. And I think you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah. There's, when you do have those experiences, they call it enlightening. So I think of that as the light of exposure is now, when you come back, you're no longer asleep at the wheel. You're seeing things with completely new eyes. You're seeing things through light and love and care for others. And so again, when you accept this world on its terms, and then you have an experience like this, and you come back and the room is lit up and you see things that are ugly and dark, and you can't unsee that because you've seen what the opposite of that is. So it is jarring to see how many people live their lives in these clouds of darkness and without any illumination in their thinking or their way of being in the world. But you have no choice in the matter. It's no accident that so many people have these experiences and come back doing Reiki. It's no accident because there is a desire to help and heal. You have been transformed and you want to help and show love, and that is a loving act to do, is physical, hands-on healing. And that's what Reiki is. And it's also, Reiki, you do not need a health degree or certification necessarily to train in Reiki. Anyone can do it if they have an interest and get their certification. So it makes it easy. Now, my mother trained as a nurse. She trained in the Dolores Krieger model, therapeutic touch. Again, very similar. There's healing touch, therapeutic touch, but the nursing model. And my mother used it on patients in the hospital who had extreme pain and they would go to sleep. And so she taught me a lot about healing and hands. I also wanted to understand spirituality more, and I would go to churches. And I was drawn to churches that emphasized healing, hands-on prayer, the power of prayer, which is, to me, that Holy Communion time, with that source of love and all being. People call God, whatever you want to call God. But I learned, again, it's not about religion. It's about spirituality. There's all kinds of religions, and people can believe and use their rituals and ideas about things. But what is spirituality? That's a universal understanding of love and care for each other. That's it. It's that simple. People make it so complicated and decide who fits in what box. But spirituality and love does not do that. Spirituality and love is about inclusion and care and acceptance and support for one another. And so, again, you know them, there's an old biblical thing, you know them by their fruits. Are their fruits loving and kind, or are they hateful, spiteful, and cruel? I look at that, and these are the people I don't want to be around. It's not that I don't love them or care, but I have to protect myself, and I choose to be around people who are loving and kind and caring. And people who are not that way, we're not going to be an energetic match. It's not comfortable. I have a somatic reaction to people who are not good people. And when I say not good, I mean in spiritual realm, we're all loved. But we do have a choice in how we're going to show up on this earth and walk this journey together. And that is what separates us. That's our fruit. Are we going to leave good fruit, or are we going to be leaving bad fruit? And that's the spiritual evolution and choice that we all have to make. So I choose to spend my time and energy with people who choose to give good fruit and to help and love one another, because that's more in alignment with where I want to be in the world and the legacy that I choose to leave behind. So when we talk about all these things and people who've had these spiritually transformative experiences, once that dimensional portal, for lack of a better word, does open, I think that it does open, or keeps the possibility open, that we can perceive other dimensions and other beings within it. So let's fast forward to the next experience, the shared near-death experience I had with David.
Yes, please.
We were just saying today is our 19th anniversary of when we decided to be together forevermore.
Today?
Yes. And 19 years ago, on November 19th, was when we decided that something amazing had happened that brought us together, and that we were going to be together for the rest of this journey. And so that we consider this our anniversary. But prior to that, in 2005, I did not know David when he had become desperately ill from a very rare form of vasculitis called, at that time, Wegener's granulomatosis. That's a fancy word for basically saying that little granulomas, like little nodules, get into the bloodstream and attack all the organ systems. And in his case, that's what happened. His lungs, his kidneys, everything shut down, and he went into respiratory arrest. His kidneys failed, and then they were damaged beyond repair with the granulomas. Kidneys do not recover; they do not regenerate. So once they're damaged to that point, that's pretty much it. They're not going to come back. But David had gone into the hospital thinking he was having a panic attack. This was again in, in September for him of 2005. Because he couldn't catch his breath, his heart was racing. He just didn't know what was going on. And that night, they admitted him. The next day, he went into an unresponsive coma and his into full respiratory arrest. He was intubated. He was had the machine, and then his kidneys failed, and then his heart went into arrhythmia, and then he was in the intensive care unit, in the critical care cardiac unit, because now his heart was not able to function. It went on from there, where he ended up having double pneumonia, One of the lungs collapsed, and he had to have a chest tube. He had sepsis. He had blood clots. And then they gave him heparin medication to thin the blood, and he had an allergic reaction to that. So on top of this catastrophic failure of multi-system organs and his vascular system, now he was responding to an allergic reaction to this, and his heart, again, was not in good shape. So he was at near death, and they called his mother to come back. And on the third call, which was in September. Yeah, so September, she was called to come from San Francisco to come to Richmond, Virginia, where David was, to say goodbye. The nurse called her this and said, you need to come say today. She got on the plane, got there at the hospital, and signed his funeral directives because they did not expect him to live. And I met her later that night at an AA meeting because I had stopped going, but I was a grad student at the time in my doctoral program. And a woman I know was going to go pick up a 20-year coin and asked me to come to that particular meeting, which I had not been going to. Well, apparently that's where, David's mother was going to be because she'd been in long-term recovery. And I had never met David, so I didn't know him, but I knew people who did know him. So she showed up, and there was just something about her that just really touched my heart. And these folks, many of whom I'd known, were standing around crying about David's demise, that he was not going to make it. And, these were really good people. And I was like, well, this must be a really special person that they're all crying about this. He had, been weeks now where he had been in the unresponsive coma, and everything just, by the time they figured out, it took about 11 or 12 consults for them to even figure out what he had. It's that rare. It's about 1 in 500 cases a year or something like that. And so he was just devastatingly ill. Also, because he'd been on the ventilator the whole time, he wasn't getting enough oxygen. And now they'd said that there was probably brain damage as well from the lack of oxygen from the ventilator. So it was just disastrous all around. And so when I met his mother, as I said, something about her just touched my heart. And it's one of those things where I went up and I was going to say, when you think you're going to say something, but what comes out of your mouth is not what you intended. And so I said to her, I don't think you should give up hope yet. And she looked at me, and I'm immediately wanted to retract those words. I'm like, why am I saying this? I don't know this woman. I don't know this guy. I don't know any of the situation. But certainly I know enough medically from having a nurse mom and to know that this is not survivable. You can't have those many devastating things going on and live. So I was like, why am I even saying this? And then I told her that I had trained in Reiki. I just finished my master's level certification. And I said, and I was on a prayer team at a church I was attending at that time that used affirmative prayer, basically just saying positive things for folks and giving thanks to God or the creator of your understanding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I told her, I said, look, I'm really sorry for what's going on. I don't, I can't promise you anything, but if you want me to go see your son, if he's still with us, I will. And she said to me, well, he's Jewish. And I said, I figured, I wanted to let her know I'd be respectful of everyone's religion. I wouldn't be, we joked about it years later. I said, I won't be pressing a cross in his chest. Don't worry about that, but I will, but I am, Reiki is not a religious healing technique. It's a Japanese-based model using energy in the body's energy field, and it's spiritually based, but not religion. So it's a full respecter of anybody's religion. But I would need your permission, obviously, because he's in the ICU. I don't, I'm a stranger. So several things happened. And again, I was a single mom at the time. I have 2 sons at that time with disabilities. And I was struggling. I was in school full time to finish my doctorate, and I barely had enough money, Mike, to put gas in my car to even afford a trip to the hospital. Mm-hmm. I was also teaching as part-time as a graduate teaching assistant, and I also picked up an adjunct class, which you weren't supposed to do, but I got a special exception to do it. And it was, oddly enough, it was a sociology course called Marriage and Family Relationships. So I'm teaching this class in addition to my 2 graduate teaching assistants classes in criminal justice. You're seeing this. And, but the marriage and family relationships class was about all things that, relationship wise, what the challenges to relationship, what is love, what are all these things, and different types of family relationships, and just exploring it. So all these things that began to happen with David. David's mother had come out later in life as a lesbian and had a partner, Ruth. And they were just amazing people I got to meet. And so, again, just very different types of relationships that I was used to. So I went to the hospital the next day. David was still alive. I didn't know if he would be when I pulled up after the class I taught at noon that day. And they let me come back. I introduced myself, and my mother had always said, even when people are in a coma, talk to them like they're awake. Just assume that they can hear you, because in her experience, they can. So when I went into his room, and I detailed this in the book, it was, it was unnerving, because the last person I'd seen on a ventilator was my father, who died from a heart attack when they had to take out the ventilator, and he was gone. So I'm having these moments of, oh my gosh, I'm in an ICU, and here's this man that I don't know, and I can't even see his face, because he's got the tubes in his nose, he's got the tube in his mouth, everything's kind of taped into place. He's bloated. I'd never seen anyone in complete kidney failure, so I didn't know that the bodies bloat. So he was completely bloated. He had the catheter bag was hanging by the side of his bed. It was totally bone dry, and it was just like the middle section was stuck together because there's been no urine output, because his kidneys were completely failed. He was unresponsive. He was also semi-paralyzed too. It was just devastating what had happened. And all I heard was the machine breathing for him. And his energy was like, he's not even in his body. I was like, this guy's going to go. But something in him, something in me opened up, my heart opened, and I just felt such a sense of overwhelming sorrow and compassion for this man. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? What has happened to you? And I was like, again, you're on multiple levels here, because my human self is having a response, but the spiritual part of me, the knowing part, is like, well, I must know him on some level, but I didn't realize. So that began, I asked his permission to work with him, because I never push Reiki or healing on anybody. It has to be that they want it. And, I've had so many people ask me to heal so-and-so, and I'm like, that's not up to me. It's up to them. And if a lot of people don't want healing, believe it or not, they just do not.
Yeah.
They're on their journey, and they're going to finish it out their way. And I respect that. I don't look at death as a bad thing. It's just the end of this life's journey, and we all are going to get there at some point. So I didn't know what would be for him, what he wanted, but I did know I was there, and I asked his permission to work with him, knowing that he could say no. Now, he couldn't speak, but I told him, I'm introduced myself. I told him my name, who I was, how I come to be there, that I'd met his mother. I told him that a lot of people from this meeting knew him, cared very much about him, and that they really loved him. And that, if he had any unfinished business and he wanted to stick around, I would do my best to help him. But if he wanted to go, to know that whatever had happened in his life to bring him to this point, that he was loved, that it would be okay, and that he should not worry about anything except knowing that he's completely loved. I just felt these feelings of shame and sadness from him. And so I was empathically picking it up. And I just stood there waiting to see if I could get any kind of feeling, whether to work with him or not. And then I felt a little puff of air. Now, that air didn't come from anywhere, because it's not like that. And then I recognized it was a spiritual puff. And so I took his hand and began praying out loud in the affirmative prayer method I had used, giving thanks for this time together, giving thanks to God, to the creator of all that is, for his healing, for this sacred healing time and giving thanks that the highest and best outcome would occur for David. And I told David that. I said, the God of my understanding is a miracle working God. And so we're going to trust that process. So I worked with him for about 15, 20 minutes. His energy levels were really low. It didn't feel like he was really in his body, although I felt some contact. And as I was getting ready to leave, I said a closing prayer and told him this. Again, why am I saying this when I don't know? But I told him, I said, if you decide to stick around, I'll make you a promise. I'll come back. And I said, and if you don't want to stay, then again, know that you were completely loved and it's okay to go into the light. And so he had the pulse oximeter, he had IV lines in his hand, so I was very careful not to dislodge anything. But so I was getting ready to let go of his hand, and then my hand was stuck. It was like I could feel his spirit reaching back. He had no grip, so it's not like he grabbed my hand, but I couldn't take my hand away. So I was surprised. It's like, his spirit was reaching out and back. And so I stood there for a moment, and I kind of, okay, you don't want me to leave yet. So I said, okay, I promise you, if you decide to stick around, I promise you I'll come back. So I went home. I was very drained. I was like, what the heck just happened here? And who is this guy? And what can I possibly do? I've never dealt with anybody this catastrophically ill. And I knew he had a choice to make, whether he wanted to live or not. And I also knew that with the devastation of his body, what I had heard and what the doctors and nurses were saying was that even if he managed to survive, he would be on permanent dialysis from the kidney damage for the rest of his life, and he may have brain injury as well, and that it was never going to recover. So I thought, gosh, that night I felt his presence in my room. And I didn't know what his eyes looked like because his eyes were closed. We had not met, but I felt him. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's in my room. And then I thought he had passed away.
Oh.
And I thought he had died. And this was his way of letting me know he's going. And at 6 the next morning, I called the hospital. I think it was right around that time, and to see if he was still alive. And they said, yes, he's still alive. Barely, but he's still alive. But that was a shock because they didn't even expect him to make it. So he was still alive, but I was like, well, he's still alive, and I made a promise. So I went back. And I worked with him that weekend, and I worked with him over a 12, 13-day period. But over that weekend, he began to stabilize. And then on Sunday, I'd gone in on Friday. So Saturday and Sunday. By Sunday, he started to produce a tiny bit of urine. Well, now kidneys, even when they're damaged, can come back enough to produce a little bit, right? They can return to some tiny level of functionality, even if they never are going to return to full functioning. And with the level of damage he had, even for him to have a little bit of functioning was great news. So he started to have that. And I came back, and I came back every day. And on that Monday or Tuesday, now this is where we get into the dimensions piece.
Yeah.
And something that totally surprised me that I had not experienced before. And I did not talk about it for years and years after because I didn't even know what to say. But I was working with him. Well, two things happened. One is that day I went in to work with him and took his hand and said my opening prayer. The next thing I know, I was out of my body. My physical body is standing there by his bedside holding his hand, but my conscious mind, just like when I was that little girl hovering out of the pool, I'm in another area, another dimension, and I'm experiencing that sense of love, eternal peace, comfort, compassion, but this is a different kind of consciousness than hovering around the pool. I'm in this like light, billions of dots of liquid light love. It's not wet. I don't have the words to describe the textures or sense of experience, but I'm in a place of love that is so enormous. In hindsight, I now say, well, that was pre-tunnel because he was in a coma state hovering out of his body. So he hadn't yet gone into the tunnel because he hadn't had a catastrophic death event. He was near death. So he was hovering, and I've since learned people in coma states have that kind of different type of near death. So there he was. And he was there in that spiritual realm, and that's where we met. And that's where I ended up changing the title of my book from Waking Up to Love to We Met on the Other Side, because that's where I met him and his spiritual essence and my spiritual essence. And we were embraced in the kind of love from a near-death experience together. So we were having what I called a shared near-death experience before I even knew what the term was, because I'm sharing in his near-death experience. This guy's ready to go. He's hovering. And the love there was so great and so huge. So when I say to people, love is so great and so huge, it's not selfish. I didn't want him to come back to such a debilitated body if that's not what he wanted. Love like that is you want the best for that person, no matter whether it includes you or not. And certainly my heart was open. Who doesn't want to have that kind of love in this life? But if it wasn't meant to be, if I just got to experience it, even for this very brief time, that this kind of love could exist with another being, that was just the gift. And I had to accept it and not be selfish and try to hold on. So when I realized this incredible love, this person, and my spirit just knew him forever. And I was like, I know this man. I've always known this being. We're showing up as male and female, but we're spiritual beings. And I've always loved him. So then the experience fades. I'm back in my body, standing there at his bedside, still holding his hand, wondering what the heck just happened here. What happened? How did this happen? How long was he out of my body? And he's still unconscious. He's still not responding. And I'm like, I've just met the love of my spiritual life, my soulmate, twin flame, whatever word you want to use, because I know that's how significant this being is. And here he is dying. But his spirit is alive. Just like there's my body on the bottom of the pool, but my spirit was alive. The parallels, but I didn't put it together then. But it was the same thing, that I was able to be out of my body. But here he had helped me to get there with him. And that's when I just knew that I would love this person. And I finally met my soulmate, and whether he was going to stick around or not was to be determined. So what happened next? And this is the part that I didn't talk about for a long time. I was in my bedroom the next night, and again, his kidney function wasn't quite where it wasn't going to be good. And that night, because of the ability I had to be able to be out of my body, I was able to check on him. You know, I could kind of see what was going on in his room just through my mind's eye. I've always had that ability. And that's because of the near-death experience. I'm never intrusive. I don't go spy. So people always say, oh, no, it's always healing-based, and it's only by permission and you know, with full respect that I respect people's privacy. So, but that night, I felt something, and I could feel like I was that fly on the corner of the wall, right? And I was looking in his room, and I saw these 4 beings around his bedside, and they appeared to be the color blue. They were very tall. Their movements were out, not like humans move. It was just incredibly fast, fluid, quick, and they looked like a medical team. They were even like scrubs. So everything was blue. And that's the part and it was not a color blue that I can easily describe. I've looked around for years and I can't find that shade of blue.
Oh, how interesting. This is very commonly reported, like with people with these kinds of experiences that confront a color that doesn't seem to exist. Yeah, keep going, please.
No, it's like blue, purple. I don't know. Anyway, so just say blue. They were solid and real as you and I are. They were standing. One was, I call him the lead doctor. He felt male to me. There was that kind of energy. But there were 4 of them, one at one, him there, one at the foot and 2 on the sides. And what I saw was like a doppelganger set of kidneys being dissolved or put inside of his body, just kind of being absorbed into his body. And so I'm watching this thinking, what am I, I'm not even thinking, I'm just observing. And then I call him the lead doctor, looks up like he sees my spiritual essence and nods his head like, I've got this. We've got this. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's aware that I'm aware and we're connecting somehow. And it looks like they've replaced holographically David's kidneys. How is that? Okay, this is what I'm perceiving. So then I don't know if it's a dream because I fall asleep. And I wake up the next morning thinking, was strange. What a strange dream, but it was felt more than a dream, but I've never encountered these types of beings.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything in this kind of healing experience. But the proof's in the pudding, as they say. So I went into the hospital again the next morning, really early, because I was wondering what the heck was going on. Was he okay? And I get there, and they're saying his kidney function is starting to improve dramatically. And over the next 5 to 7 days, the nephrologist was coming in saying, we don't know what's going on, but his kidneys are improving exponentially till they return to full function. They said, that's not possible. The nurses and doctors started calling him Miracle Boy. He was in a Catholic hospital. And they just were saying, we don't know how this has happened. And that's why we ended up on the show years later called The Unexplained with William Shatner. And they focused on that particular event. But, so what happened was his kidneys were healed 100%. And there's no medical explanation because of the level of damage from the granulomas. We have his medical records. They've been reviewed by multiple medical doctors for verification, and that's why it's called The Unexplained. There's no explanation for how that happened. So I have to accept what seems the most unlikely event, but now in context of the ability of being out of consciousness, that these beings from another dimension healed him. Since then, he went on and made an exponential healing all around it. And he came to consciousness, I guess, about 10 days into the healing time. And he still wasn't able to talk. They finally were able to remove the tubes so he could begin to breathe on his own. He couldn't speak because long-term tubes and how sore his throat was. And his nose had been pushed out and from the feeding tubes. And so he just had to get back into being in this body. Anyway, he later told me that when he woke up, he didn't have the conscious recall of meeting on the other side, but he said, later we've talked about it, he said, I had the spiritual recall because he said, I knew everything about you. I knew I was going to marry you. I knew I'd always loved you, and I didn't even know your name. But he knew that. He said I was instantly in love. I just knew, and which at the time, he had not, his divorce wasn't yet final. I didn't even know any about this at that time until I met at the time I was working with him, he was still married, and his soon-to-be ex-wife had flown in, and she was shocked too. She thought he was going to pass. But the marriage had been over for quite a long time. But anyway, but this was not where I was thinking. I was thinking more of an agape type of love, or I didn't even know this guy. So I hadn't even heard his voice. And until recently, I didn't even know what color eyes he had because they'd been closed the whole time. But
so let me just he could. So you met him in the hospital room.
Yeah, when he finally wakes up. So now we meet multiple times. One, that spiritual realm.
Were you there when he first woke up?
No, I wasn't there when he first woke up.
But when you entered the room for the very first time, when he was conscious, he couldn't talk.
He couldn't talk. All he could do was hold out his arms. And he just held out his arms, and I just hugged him.
Oh, okay, keep going. I'm sorry, this is such a remarkable story.
Well, I just hugged him because I was just so shocked to see him awake and alive, and to see his eyes, which were a beautiful brown. And I was just so flooded with all kinds of emotion and feelings and of shock, confusion, love. Just what has happened here? Who is this? What's happening here? And, I didn't attribute it to me being a great healer. And that has been something that happened that the show said, and I have never said that. I think that the healing love and energy that came through me was powerful in this encounter. And I do feel that there are some healing abilities that I may have, but I don't ever hold myself out to be a great healer. I do want to set that record straight, which is why I did the second edition of the book. But I do think there are healing things that I have learned that anyone can do that are useful. And that's part 2. We'll talk about that. But anyway, David, I hugged him. He couldn't talk. And I asked him if he'd like me to do some more healing work with him. So I focused on, he nodded his head and touched his heart and lung area. So I just focused on doing some healing work in that area and told him I'd be back again. And so I came back, and on the final night, he was supposed to be discharged to a rehab facility. He was able to talk, and he shared with me some things about his life and how awful things had been, and he doesn't even know really what happened to him, except that he knows it was still fall. When he came in September, it was right after Labor Day, and now we were in mid-October, moving toward November, and he just has this, what happened?
Yeah.
And he said, and everything has changed, and he doesn't even understand what even happened to him, let alone who I am, how he's having these feelings. And he wasn't really articulating his feelings about me at that time, except that he was just overwhelmed with everything. And so anyway, he told me that they'd found more blood clots in his arms. And so I said, would you like me to do a little healing work on that? And I felt really awkward too, because even when you have this enormous spiritual connection, we're still meeting in real life for the first time.
Yeah.
And so in that essence, in our physical realms, we're strangers to each other. We just met me. But we've had this spiritually gut-wrenching encounters, and
Wow.
and I've been working with him for all these days and watching the up and down of his health and what might happen and whether he's going to live or not. It wasn't a straightly upward trajectory on his health. It was up and down, and one, and then the concerns about his potential brain injury and all of these things, and then just watching his kidney capacity increase back to full 100%, and the shock from the doctors, this is even happening here. I'm like, something has happened. And then the experience with those blue beings, I had never had that happen. But one of the things I'd always said in my prayer, when I'd work with him, I would say under, his highest and best, under the God's creative hand in this dimension and any other. I had never said that before. To this day, I don't know why I said that, but I did. That was my daily prayer. And I trusted my instincts on the words that would come. So it was this dimension or any other. Later again, as if I've had years to process this, Mike. And then I realized this dimension or any other. So any other dimension, the portal got opened. And when he was healed, the portal closed, and I knew it. I knew that they had done their job and he was going to be okay. And he was. And long story short, by November 19th, we knew he got out of the hospital. He had a second relapse where he ended up nearly dying again from the medication. They treat this disorder like cancer, so he had immunosuppressant medications too much. He ended up with double pneumonia and nearly died again. At that point, I went in to work with him, and we just knew that was it. I was like, I don't know how long we're going to get. Maybe this is all we're going to get. But if it's all we're going to get, thank God I got to get any of this kind of love and have this experience, even if it was just for this time. And if this is all I get, I'm ahead of the game of this life. And I will always be grateful that I got to feel and experience that a love like this could exist. And it wasn't, like I said, I couldn't be selfish. I couldn't hold on to it. I just had to be with it and understand it was going to last or end, and it wasn't up to me at this point. There was a greater and higher power, and I had to respect that, and I did. As it turned out, we ended up staying and being together, and that was it. So we were married in June of 2006.
Wow.
And we've been together ever since, and been married now 18 years. This event was 19 years ago. David's kidneys are still fine. And he's had some health challenges along the way, but he's still here, and he's doing his Wegner's has been pretty much in remission. He had one flare back in 2019, but he's been doing fine ever since, and we continue to take it one day at a time. We're both very involved in our recovery. We try to be loving and caring people. We try to help others. We try to be sources of support to our family, and just try to be good people. Are we perfect people? Nope. We're just human. But we are aware that there are other dimensions, and that there is a higher power, and that we do have a spiritual requirement to love one another and to help others as we have been helped. And I take that very seriously. And so we know we're here together. We know it's a privilege. We know we're grateful for each other and for this time. And we both say, you got a second chance in life that a lot of people never get. But you did, and I did. And what can we do with it that's going to help others? What can we share that's going to be transformative, that's going to add to people's awareness of what's possible?
Oh.
And that's what I want to do. And that's why I wrote the book. It's deeply personal. It's not like I'm some saint, and I don't pretend to be. And I don't want to be thought of that way. I'm very human. And I've striven to be the best person I can be, warts and all. I make my stumbles, but I've worked hard to educate myself, to learn, to understand science, to understand statistics, to understand, just to have a full appreciation for what it takes to become an expert in a field. And I want to use that in a way that helps people. I'm not here's the balancing act, is that having had these very unusual experiences, I understand that there's far more to our world than this physical reality. And I have full respect for the properties of this physical reality.
Yeah.
And say, well, we can measure those. We can use gold standard scientific methodology for things, for experiments, for dose response reactions and things. We can do that. But when we're trying to quantify or make sense of spiritual experiences, William James did that, his varieties of religious experience, where he tried to understand metaphysical concepts. And, they're not easily measurable. They are unique to the person because we're unique souls. We all have our thumbprints, our fingerprints that are unique to us. We have our soul print that is unique to us. And so no one's going to have identical experiences. It's just, how would they? We're all filtering through this spiritual perception of our individual soul print and why we're here on this earth. And when we mix with others, and our soul prints are still unique. And I just see this in the universe too. I mean, our essence, our whatever makes us us, is something unique and beautiful. And we have a responsibility, while we've had this opportunity in this life to be here together on this planet. How are we going to evolve in the next set of evolution? There's more and more of us here now, Mike, because of medical technology. People now have more near-death experiences because more people are revived through technology, or kept alive through medical interventions that would not have had them, say, 30, 40, 50 years ago. But because we use the best of medical technology, we've got more and more people who've come back from near-death experiences who have had cognitive recall. Some have not, but some have, and they are contributing to the body of knowledge these experiences. So we can't just dismiss them or say because we can't quantifiably explain them with this study. I'm a researcher at heart. I love evidence and proof. I'm the ultimate skeptic. And I'd be the first to tell you that. Show me the money, show me the proof. I love statistics. I love spreadsheets. So I love evidence. And I was trained in journalism too. So I want facts. That's why when David and I brought our story forward, I was like, I wanted his medical records reviewed by medical doctors. Is this true? Is this correct? Is this truly unexplained? Yes, it is. Multiple sources. When we were on the TV show, The Unexplained, we were on the first season. I think it was episode 6 back in, I think, 2019. I'll have to double check. But the medical, I appreciated that about the show and their integrity was that they insisted on David's medical records and having a medical review there too. And I said, of course, we don't want to make a claim that isn't medically verifiable. That was important to me as a journalist. Is it true or, can you prove it? And we did. So the only thing about the show, as I said, was that in their opening, they said that I said I was a great healer. And that was the part that opened the floodgates for people all over the world to reach out for help. And I felt awful that I couldn't help as many people. And then I thought, well, maybe God is calling me to do a healing practice. So I did try that for a while, and I didn't like it because healing for me doesn't work that way. I have to have a spiritual call to help people. And I didn't want to make money on it, but by the same token, I have bills to pay, so I charged. But then I felt like a work for hire, and I did not like that. And I felt like if someone's paying me to help them, then I want them to be fixed, and spirit doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So it was hard for me to do that, and then just how much it took out of me to really do that kind of work. So I had to stop, and then being inundated because the show is in reruns all over the world. I got very friendly with Google Translate because I had requests from all over the world, thousands of them. And I was just, again, overwhelmed. And I felt bad that I couldn't get back to people. I'd be on the phone. So what I am doing now is because... I don't feel like I'm a great healer, but I do feel I learned some things that could help others who also want to do healing work. So I am really considering to go ahead and do healing, teach healing next year and just set up some actual training in the methods that I've used. And these are interdimensional, and there is a way to access those different dimensions. And I don't think you have to have a near-death experience to do it or spiritually transformative or catastrophic experience that catapults you out of your normal consciousness. I think there are ways to access this. And so I'd like to teach people how to do it. What I have learned, that is a combination of Reiki. It's a combination of self-hypnosis. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of using the proper word choices that are affirmative. And it's also a way of being absolutely respectful that there is a pattern and order to this universe and that everybody does have a choice. People often don't realize that. There is a choice. And even if death is the choice, the ultimate decision for that person at that time, sometimes we don't want to accept it, but this person that's their choice. And we have to respect others' choices about things. And even when we don't like it.
Yeah.
And that's been a hard one for people because love demands of us to respect others' choices. And that's hard when we want what we want. So again, that's a part of the spiritual evolution is of your own growth is love is patient. Love is kind. It's not selfish. It's not self-seeking. So when we talk about love and relationships, what often passes for that is trades. You trade me this, I'll trade you that. Mm-hmm. You give me this, you don't meet my needs. It's not very evolved. It's not very kind. It's not very loving or helpful to one another. But yet if you can find someone that you can go through your life with this, who accepts you even when you make mistakes or you're not at your best, and you can laugh. I think humor is one of the most underrated things.
Yeah.
But that is so important, where you have a good sense of humor and you can laugh at life's difficulties and find comfort in each other that, hey, we're going to get through this together. That's a real gift. And so, it is what we make it in this life. And I am very aware that the choices and challenges that Dave and I signed up for, a lot of people said, oh my gosh, I don't know how any relationship would survive all that, because he still had to heal. It took 2 years for him to get his lung capacity back. It took a long time for him to get back, even though he had the miracle healing. And we had to deal with all kinds of relationship stuff with all those heavy duty strikes to start. I mean, and so, it was a lot. But here we are 19 years later. And just this morning before this podcast, we had a little talk about things. And I said, it's been 19 years when we realized that we loved each other. Today's that anniversary. And I said, could you have imagined when 19 years ago, when we didn't even know what had hit us like a freight train? I said, you didn't even know if you were going to live. Everything had gone wrong in his life. He said this, I'm sure he won't mind. I mean, he had lost everything financially. His marriage had ended he was away from his daughters. He didn't know if he would even have a job. He didn't know how he was going to pay the hundreds of thousands in medical bills. His health was so precarious. He was trying to recover, and here we're in a new relationship, and we're wondering, does this even make sense? Because I told all my students, you never want to be with someone in that first year who's newly divorced. All these things are deal breakers. Someone who's got a major illness, this, that, all these things he had would be on the column not to have a relationship with someone with all these problems to deal with. And yet here we were. So I was like, well, I guess love has another idea. And then we talked about that too. I said love at that time, it was so fragile with all of these strikes. And yet the profound meeting that we had on that other side bonded us in a way that was unbreakable. And so we've had our challenges over the years. You can't not live, be with someone 19 plus years and deal with blended families and special needs kids and all the things that happen in life. And we've had multiple job changes, moving many times, relocations for jobs. And we've just had, the typical types of stress. And yet here we are. And today we're so grateful for the life that we do have, and grateful for our families, grateful for where we are today. And I just try to have to remember to keep that focus on gratitude. I know we're in turbulent times. I've mentioned that before. No matter how you feel about the political structure, and I don't talk so much about politics, but I talk about policy. So I want to see what the policies are going to bring to people now. Are we going to have policies that harm people, or are we going to have policies that help people? And that's how we're going to know the fruits of where we are as a collective consciousness. And we're being put to a test now. There are a lot of people who aren't of good character in leadership roles, and I don't think anyone can dispute that. Mm-hmm. We've got people with severe character issues, and women are alarmed that these folks are sexual predators as well. And this is frightening. This is very frightening to women. So part of me is holding that knowledge that things will work out okay. And there's the faith and belief that things will work out even better than what we expect. And that there is a call now for us to be even more loving, more strong, more caring, and more demonstrative in a loving and compassionate way. We've got to help each other.
Yeah.
We have to love each other. We have to support each other. And we have to be of good character. It sounds so cheesy, Mike, but I'll say this. That's one of the things I learned the most from my near-death experience and from all living this life has been, this is a test of your character and who you're going to be. And everything you do affects your spiritual body. Everything. So if you want to do harm to others, you're hurting yourself. There's no separation with us. Mm-hmm. And people just don't understand that. They think, oh, well, but you can't hurt another human being who is on this spiritual journey with you and not have something happen to your body, because we are all connected. We are all a human family. And if we've been fortunate enough to have the experience of other dimensional beings or an expanded consciousness from a near-death experience, we know this. So we can't be a bad character. We have to be a good character. It's a spiritual mandate. And so it is jarring when you look into the eyes of people who are not a good character. You see it clearly because that is part of the enlightenment. And, my spirit recoils. I don't want to be around these folks. I can't, but I don't wish them any harm. See, there's the difference. I would never harm another. I just can't do it. And I don't want anyone harmed.
Yeah.
I don't care if I don't like them or disagree or whatever. I just, you don't hurt people. You just don't hurt people. That's not right. We are spiritually required to love one another. That's it. That is it. And when we look at the vastness of this world, and there's billions, trillions, perhaps galaxies. We can't even comprehend how enormous this universe is. But so to think that we're it is really, just doesn't even make sense to think that we're functioning at such a low level as humans. But we got the gift of enlightenment. We got to see that there was something more through these visitations from other beings. And I consider that a privilege. People have always asked me, well, do you consider that, a UFO experience?
The blue beings.
Yeah.
The blue doctors, yeah.
Right. It's not, I didn't see a craft, but certainly these beings are not of this dimension. Now, are they planetary? I don't know. I think they're most likely in a dimensional field. But the fact that there were healing beings in another dimension who showed up in a way that I could perceive, and David had a direct, medically provable result, that tells me something is going on here. One other thing I want to add, because I thought it was so unusual and didn't want to talk about it, but when we did finally mention it at an IANS conference 10 years later, one of the lead researchers said, at the Q&A, people have been having this experience all over the world with the blue beings. And I was like, oh, I did not know that. So subsequently, I've done years of research into it, and internationally have found people having these experiences, reporting about these blue beings. Artie Six Killer Clark, who is a Native American woman.
Oh, I'm very familiar with her, yeah.
Yeah, wrote her book about the blue beings and the interconnection with the Native American community, particularly service personnel in the military in the 1940s and 50s, recounted being taken aboard crafts with these blue beings. So I didn't have the craft, but I did have encounter with these blue beings. And I will tell you that subsequently I have had experiences with them since. It's not on demand. These are not push button things, but they have shown up in other healing encounters here and there down the way. So they are real. People have told me who they think they are. Nothing that I've heard of agrees with what I saw or perceived. I've been told, well, they're Pleiadians or Turians or this or that.
Yeah.
That doesn't resonate for me. And also when I've seen imagery, I don't see anything that looks like what I saw. So I just don't know.
Have you drawn it or had it?
I'm not an artist.
I am.
Oh, that's true. So maybe I should transcribe it to you. We'll do like the police sketching, right?
Sure, yeah. I've done that many times. Yeah, so.
Okay, so maybe we should do that. But what I'm saying is, when you have a privilege, and now I see that there's a lot of shame around trying to talk about this because we're in a society that...
I'm trying to break that shame. I'm working hard to break that shame.
Well,
yeah.
Me too. That's why, and for you doing this, I appreciate you doing this and having this conversation, because this is where we educate people. I'm an educator at heart and a healer, and the two go hand in hand. The more you know, the greater your mind expands. And the greater your heart expands, because you have more understanding, you have more awareness, you have more knowledge. I love knowledge. And I think it is so important that we challenge, we question. And the more we question, the more we learn. The more we have nuance, the more we have context. So I've had people question me on all aspects of our experience. And every single time, every question they've asked me has enabled me to look at this experience from a new lens of today. And it's like, oh, I have another insight that happened. Or, oh, I see this more fully now. Thank you for asking me. And one more example, I had someone who asked me about the shared near-death experience. And well, I'm having a little hard time trying to understand how that happened. That's the only thing. I'm not sure if I totally think maybe you embellished that. And I'm like,
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, do you remember how we met?
Oh, tell us again. Remind me. Refresh your listeners.
So last year I published a novel, and it would have been a little over, I guess it would almost probably be 2 years ago now, maybe. I would have to look this up. But so I was working on the book, and the book is called The Unseen. I've talked about it on the show before. It's kind of I wanted to address the emotions and moods and mystery that seem to revolve around the owl and UFO experience. And it's very, very subtle and intangible. So I said, well, I'll write a fiction thing and see if I can capture it that way. So I relied heavily on the reading I had done on the near-death experience in the book. It was almost more near-death experience. There's no UFO. Never once did I mention the word UFO in the book. I never say near-death experience either, but I certainly recount, kind of a blurry line between a near-death experience and an out-of-body experience. Core to the story, right about in the middle of the story, the two main characters, a little bit of a love interest there, are on a swing set, and there's two owls. This is based on sort of a real-life experience I embellished heavily. These people are on a swing set in kind of a lonely, empty town, and there's an owl on one corner of the swing set, and there's an owl on the other corner of the swing set, and they're talking, having conversation on the two swings, and then whoosh, they're vaulted into another realm, instantly. And that becomes pivotal to the story because in that other realm, they are confronted with a deeper reality. They're confronted with the fact that there's more than just this material world. They're confronted with this realm of infinite knowledge, which gets reported a lot. And then they come back, and then they have to make sense of this experience. They may have only been out for a few minutes. I wrote that in a flurry. I wrote that furiously one night. I knew I had to write this. I had the outline, and I wrote it one night, and I stayed up late, and I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. It just poured out of me. And the next day, I was going through the text, and I was like, I repeated this word. Let me clean this up. I should use a comma instead of a period here. And let me just change this a little bit here. And then as I'm having this, sort of workaday thing where I'm doing some of my own self-editing, I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? This doesn't make any sense. Two people having a shared out-of-body experience, two people having a shared near-death experience, this doesn't make any sense at all. I'm asking the readers to believe this story, to get pulled along in this story, but I just introduced something it doesn't make sense. It's not, I felt like I spent 3 years of my life working on this book, and I'm like, oh my God, my heart just sank. I ruined the book. I included something that was so illogical and so beyond belief that no one's going to follow it. And then I had this sense of oh my God, I'm tired. I am so tired right now. I can barely keep my eyes. So I lay down and boom, I went to sleep. Bam, I was out. And then I woke up, and it was almost I felt like I woke up maybe an hour later, but it was almost is it the next day? Am I waking up in the morning? And I went back to the computer, and I did something I almost never do. I checked Facebook and there's a little column where you can check and see if you got a friend request. And there was this woman's face in this friend request thing. And I'm like, who is this person? And I was like there's so many bots and fake identities and things like that. I was like, I'm gonna check who this person is. And it was you. It was Scarlett Heinbuch. So I Googled you. And the very first thing that came up was your book about a shared near-death experience. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm including it in the book. So I was doubting it. My heart dropped. I was full of insecurities and doubts. Those doubts vanished. I never, ever, ever questioned it for a half a second after that. And it's the core event of the book that bonds the two characters together.
That makes sense.
And why did you reach out to me?
I'm trying to remember now. It's been a while.
We were both friends with Sharon Hewitt-Rowlett.
Right. I think Sharon and I had talked about some of your writing and something you were working on. And so she said, maybe check in with Mike about this or that. I forget exactly why, but it was...
I think it was the cover of the book. Didn't you ask me to do the cover?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. That's correct.
Yeah, because you're putting together the second edition.
That's right. Thank you.
Oh, so the listeners may not know, but I did the cover to the second edition.
Yes, and it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. And you were very clear in the back and forth dialogue that we had. The book cover has got its own has to be simple, but there's the little speckly dots that make up the glow behind the two hands that are holding each other, and that you were very specific about those, and I tried to represent that realm you talked about. And I remember you were very clear, and you said it here too, that there were these little points of dot in that realm where you met David in that spiritual realm, and each little dot represented like an enormous... I can't remember how you said it, but each little dot represented like an enormous quantity of infinite love, and you were surrounded in these dots. So that was very much at the forefront of my mind when I was trying to use that little glow and have that glow be made of dots.
Well, I think the cover that you did based on all this perfectly summed up. That's why I loved it so much. The holding the hands at the bedside, but being surrounded in this love and where we met. The thing about what you're talking about is, we're all reluctant to share about experiences that are out of the normal realm because of the people not, understanding it or thinking that, well, it couldn't possibly be true. But here's the thing. When the person asked me, well, are you sure about what you perceived? Again, I'm ahead of the curve, I guess, because when I had my near-death experience in 1964 as a child, again, the term near-death experience wasn't coined. It wasn't even known to be a thing until the mid-'70s when Dr. Raymond Moody did. But here's the other thing. Now, there's a whole group studying shared death experiences, and that is where somebody dies and the person who's alive goes part of the way with them. And so basically they're having a journey out of the body with the departing soul of a person. It doesn't even have to be a loved one. Hospice workers have reported this. People are, oh my God, I'm out of my body in this other realm with this person who died. And obviously you can't go all the way or you die with them, but they're out of their body and they're shocked by this. That this event is happening. Well, I have the same thing, only it was a near death because David didn't complete the dying process. I was with him halfway while he was hovering. So now we have a term. Now we have a phenomenon that's being dissected more fully. Now we're having people having these experiences spontaneously who have no knowledge of that this kind of thing can even happen. The terms are still new. So I guess when I had that experience with David 19 years ago, there weren't terms. So the best term I could come up with was shared near death. And I chose that term because I was sharing in his near death experience.
Absolutely.
So finding people are having shared death experiences where someone did die and they're out of their body, it's like, that's what I'm saying to people. Okay, now we know that people have these encounters, and here's something that's similar to it that you can learn more about that's going to help you maybe to understand and put into context what happened with us. It's not any different. It's not even unusual. It's just that it has not been reported as much, but now it is. So, again, it's just interesting to me how people can have experiences, but it's when we give them names, when we can give a name to an experience that people can relate to, and when we can gather evidence, which is what's happening with more and more of these reportings of shared death experiences. To my knowledge, David and I are probably I don't know of any other shared near-death experiences like what we had that also became a love story, because this is how we met. I don't know any others at this time. That may be that there have been and people met this way, but this is how we met. And, like I said, there's no explanation how he was even able to come back, how he was able to the body to heal.
Oh,
and
I would argue that. So this is me talking, because I have to I confront this kind of stuff often, where people will say, "Wow, there's no explanation." You know what happens? So people will tell me their UFO and owl story, or sometimes just an owl story, and they'll say, "This is crazy. This doesn't make any sense." And I was like, yeah, like, unless you're me and you hear this story like 6 times a day, like people are reaching out to me with their stories. So oftentimes what I have to do is people say, "This is crazy. This doesn't make any sense." And I say, no. This is normal. This does make sense. If you, so I'm not beholden to the scientific method. I'm not a scientist. So I can say whatever I want.
That's right.
But I'm saying this is normal when you factor in that you live in a magical universe.
Yes.
So these events are normal in a magical universe. The magical events can happen in a magical universe. A strict materialist would hate the word magical. I have no problem using it because it's the perfect word. Miraculous, the miracle boy, miracle. That's a word that a strict materialist wouldn't want to use, but I'm absolutely comfortable saying miracle, miraculous, magic, because these things do happen. Earlier on, you said, and I wrote this down, you were kind of struggling a little bit, like, what can you do? What can I do? You said, what can you and David do? And my answer, which I wrote here, is like, you can tell your story. You can tell your story. There's such a tremendous power in the story, and you don't need to be a scientist to tell a story. Your story is your story. And that's what I have been doing. And that's what I've been encouraging people to reach out to me and share their stories. And I do not want these stories hiding away in a file cabinet somewhere. I think these stories need to be out there. They need to be alive. People need to hear them, because there's a power to these stories. And like, you can hear a story, you can receive a story, you can listen to a story. And I'm, as I said right from the very beginning, I'm very empathetic, and I get pulled into these stories in such a real way. I just feel them so strongly. So listening to someone's story is a magical experience for me, because I get so drawn into their story. So that would be, how do we change the world? Like I would say we share these magic stories. And because of the internet, and because of something as silly as podcasting and YouTube and things like that, we are now able to share stories in a way that we never have been able to all throughout human history.
Yes.
Things that were once shared around the campfire. I think there was a time in human history where we had permission to share magical stories, and that changed. And now with the advent of the internet, I think it's reemerging, and I want to encourage that reemergence.
In our dissertation research, we were always told that our mandate is to advance the body of, advance a topic to contribute to the body of literature about a topic. That's how you develop expertise, and that's how you move it forward. So what you're doing here with the podcasts and intelligent discussion around these types of experiences, we call them anomalous experiences because they don't fit a neat little box, and they are uniquely subjective to the people who encounter them. But there are some commonalities, and these are where, as scientists and researchers like me, we can find those common elements. It's just part of the research process. And when you start to really have these discussions and find out, as you pointed out, you're hearing stories 6 times a day or more about people having these experiences, then they no longer become something where there's a stigma, or you have to be in the closet with your encounter or your experience just because people haven't heard enough of. One of the things that I advanced in social norms theory in my dissertation research is, again, how do you correct misunderstandings and myths? You do that by changing the perception with truth, with the repetition of facts, with the sharing of true information. And it's often surprising to people that what they thought they knew to be true is not. So when they get correct information, when they find out, oh my gosh, more and more people are experiencing these things, then they begin to understand that it isn't unusual. It really is not. In fact, it's become more and more part of the social fabric of awareness and understanding. So I appreciate what you're doing in the podcast and and having these discussions and sharing them with people. And I appreciate your listeners who are listening, and just being willing to understand that they can have new understandings even after this. And they don't have to be afraid to share what they have experienced, because there are more and more of us who have, it takes a lot of courage to share these things. It's a very vulnerable place to be, to share this experience. But those were the reasons and the choices we did, because in the end, I want people to know that we are more than our bodies, that there's so much more that we are capable of. But if we are choosing a path, then choose a path of love and help for one another, because that is not only the path to higher grace, it's also the path to higher consciousness. And I will also say that I've encountered near-death experienced people who were not of integrity before they had their experience. But after they did, they changed. They changed to better people. They changed to people who chose to be a better character, because they realized there's a spiritual call here, because it is a privilege to have these experiences, and it is a gift, and it's also a responsibility. You are responsible now because you know better. Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better, something like that. So I'm paraphrasing, but we know better. So if we know better, we're responsible to do better. And in the end, what contribution are we going to make that is doing better? And if all we can do is maybe give someone a smile that day who's looking sad, that's a loving gesture.
Oh, I think that reverberates so powerfully. A smile, I feel so strongly that there's an immense power to that.
There is. And just understanding, listening. Again, I choose to be loving and kind in this world. I'm going to choose to help others. And I know the power of prayer is the power of marshaling that energy that is available to all of us. So I hope that this, conversation helps people to really, really focus on the mandate within their own spirits to be good, better angels and good people, and to make sure that they are coming from a higher perspective. And if they're not, to take a look at their spiritual opportunity here to grow into better beings, better people. They have a choice. We all do.
We all do.
We all do.
And we have to make that choice moment by moment.
Moment by moment.
And so someone asked me at a UFO conference, we've been doing research and everything like that. Well, how does that make you feel? How's your life changed? And I thought for a moment, and I said, I now live in a magical universe. And I sort of caught myself when I said that. I was like, that's true. And so I have to proceed forward with that. With that as, that's right there at my starting point. So we do live in a magical universe, and we can share that magic. This has been a delight. Thank you so much. This has been a joy.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really glad to have been here, and it's so great to have this conversation.
How do people find you?
Oh, I do have a website. It's scarlettheinbuch.com. I have my book, and I think you mentioned the Rice University talk that I gave last year. If you can post that for your readers, that's going to tell listeners, that's going to tell everybody pretty much where I'm coming from about our experience. But so there I am, and I've tried to do a comprehensive job of narrating what our story is, but in the end, like I said, that's where people can find out about me, is on the website. And I know people still reach out. I can't really get back to all the people that do, and I apologize for that.
And I apologize too. I know just what you're saying.
And I pray for their forgiveness. It doesn't, but I will say this, every email I get, I do read. I pray for everybody, even if I can't get back to them. That doesn't mean they're not, I am praying for them. If there's been any point of contact, they're going to be in my prayers. And I always send the spiritual push of energy their way, of love and care. And with the understanding that sometimes maybe that's all they needed was to write down what they were thinking and send it on. So yeah, that's it. And I'll keep people updated about any teaching that I will be doing next year. And so if folks want to do that, with me, then that would be a gift too. So
This has been a delight. Thank you.
thanks, Mike.
This went great. It was just great. Just great. This is Mike chiming in after the editing, and you can hear me there at the end. Yes, this was great. This was really great. When I first got on the call with Scarlett, and before we started recording the interview, I said I would speak up at about the hour mark and ask how she was doing and how long we should continue the conversation. Well, let me say, I was looking at the clock at the 1 hour mark, and there was no way that I was going to interrupt her. She was talking about the deepest, most powerful experiences, and I was totally swept along in what she was saying. There is a video in the show notes, and Scarlett mentioned this during the talk, and it's from Jeff Kripal's Archives of the Impossible conference from 2023. I highly recommend this video. It's about a half hour long. Now, I want to say something here. It wasn't too long, maybe just a few years ago, and at that point, I had a very rigid idea about what the near-death experience was. Now, for me, the way I framed it, at that point, the experiencer would technically need to die. Their heart and their breathing would need to completely stop, like literally dead. I no longer feel that way. There are so many variations on what makes the near-death experience what it is. One example would be Ibn Alexander's remarkable story in his book Proof of Heaven, and this took place in a medically induced coma, so he was not physically dead. His heart was beating, his respirations continued the whole time, and he had such a trippy, expansive, almost psychedelic journey into the infinite. Other people have had experiences where an OBE, an out-of-body experience, takes on the same checklist of events within the NDE. And on and on and on. There are a lot of variations. And I want to say this, and I feel I need to say this, because for myself, loosening up my rigid ideas on this subject has helped me, and helped me a lot. And it has allowed so much more in that I would have dismissed out of hand in an earlier chapter of I guess, who I was. And all I can do is continually build on the person I am and become hopefully more and more open to some of the more elusive and difficult issues that seem to swirl around these already challenging subjects. I spoke with author Sharon Hewitt-Rowlett in an earlier episode. I think this was show number 5. And I said that I had been listening to a lot of podcasts on the near-death experience. And of the many books that Sharon has written, one of them was on the near-death experience. And I tried to articulate how they made me feel, these NDE podcasts. Like they really charged me up. They really gave me a beautiful, powerful way to look at the world around me and to look at reality. And she heard me and she laughed and she said, yeah, you listen to those and you don't need to go to church. And yep, she's right. She summed up the power of these stories in her very simple statement. Also, I know someone who teaches Reiki, and she recommends Scarlett's book, We Met on the Other Side, to her students because it gives what she feels is the very best description of how doing Reiki actually feels, how it feels to the therapist in the act of giving Reiki. And that one detail makes Scarlett's already very impressive book something even more important. Peace and strength, and thank you so much. Bye now. Hi there, this is Mike. I'm back again. The show ended, but I'm going to talk a little bit more here. I just want to say to anyone listening that I have a Patreon site. Now, the show is easily available on any of the streaming services. Anyone listening to this and have made it this far, you've figured that out. But the Patreon site has a very small community, and I would love to make that community grow. I work very hard on these shows. I feel there is a value to these shows, and I feel that it is important to share these remarkable stories from people like Scarlett and so many others. So joining the Patreon site can be totally free. I'm not asking for any money. But if you want to donate, there are some levels, and it's very easy to do. I will also say that it has been very important to me not to put commercials on this show. I worked in advertising for a long time. I got very strong feelings about it. Wow, I do not want to put advertisements on this show. I'll leave it at that. Also, if you're interested, the show is available on YouTube. There's no visuals at all. It's just a logo. But if you want to search it out that way, you can find all the shows on YouTube also. Now, I am officially ending this. Again, thanks so much. Bye now. Owls are somehow connected to UFOs. I don't say that lightly. After over a decade of obsessive investigation, I am convinced of this connection. As strange as it may seem, people are seeing owls in the highly charged moments of a UFO sighting, and within the challenging memories of UFO abduction. This mystery has been the focus of my research. My name is Mike Cleland, and I have explored these connections in my book, The Messengers. At its core, this book is simply a collection of stories, and each is a remarkable real-life experience. The Messengers is also my own story of how owls played a role in my life. It's an exploration into the deeply personal questions that arose from my own contact experiences. Whitley Strieber said this about The Messengers.
It's a wonderful book because it's a book that advances us in consciousness. It advances us. It takes us from where we were before we started reading it to a new place in terms of understanding the close encounter experience. I can name just on the fingers of one hand the number of books that actually do that.
The Messengers is the first in a trilogy of books, and each volume explores a deeper aspect of the UFO mystery. Stories from the Messengers, owls, UFOs, and a deeper reality. This is the second in the series, and it tells a series of 19 real-life stories, each with UFOs and owls. The third is Hidden Experience, a memoir of owls, synchronicity, and UFO contact. This is my own story, my emotional journey of coming to terms with very challenging memories and experiences. All my books are available on Amazon in paperback, ebook, and as audiobooks. Hey, this is Mike, and I have been pretty upfront with saying that I will not put advertisements in my podcast. And then I follow that up with, except if it's for my books. So what you just heard was very clearly an advertisement, and it's for my books. And if you have read or listened to any of my books, I would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment and leave a review or rate it on Amazon. This one simple act, more than anything, truly helps a self-published author like me to get the word out, allowing other readers to discover my work. So let me add a few more things. If you enjoyed this episode and my other episodes, and you would like to support the show, please consider joining me on Patreon. Your contributions will help keep this podcast ad-free, and you always have the option to join my Patreon site as a free member. All my shows will remain free. There are extras for paying members, things like behind-the-scenes updates and an occasional chat with the host. That's me, and you can do that with the other members, but that will be for paying members only. If you like the show, please help spread the word. Share the podcast with your friends, leave a review, or post about it on social media. Your support means so much to me. Bye now.